It's kind of strange to think that nuclear weapons haven't always just been in the hands of, the superpowers.
Right. History has these weird turns, like Ukraine suddenly finding itself a major nuclear power, at least on paper.
Exactly. And that really makes you question what having that power actually entails, beyond just the headlines.
And that's where we're headed today in this deep dive. We want to unpack the economic side of things, which often gets overlooked.
Using Ukraine's situation after the Soviet collapse as a case study.
Precisely. And our main guide here is the work of Dr. Lev Neymotin. His paper, Nuclear Weapons, Asset or Liability. Case in point, Ukraine. It really lays out a fascinating argument.
And Dr. Neymotin, he's got quite the background for this. PhD in mechanical engineering from Kazakh State University.
Yeah, and significant time at Brookhaven National Lab working on non-proliferation, national security, reactor safety analysis, securing nuclear materials internationally.
Plus earlier work in Russia on thermonuclear power engineering. So he knows the technical nuts and bolts.
Absolutely. And what's really key in his analysis, I think, is that he zeroes in on the finances, the practicalities.
Not just the geopolitics.
Right. His core position, the one we're really digging into, is that for most countries, getting nuclear weapons isn't really a power move. It's more like an economic millstone, a huge liability.
Okay, so Ukraine, 1991, the Soviet Union dissolves. How does Ukraine end up with the world's third largest nuclear arsenal? Like, overnight?
Oh, it kind of was overnight. As the Soviet Union broke apart, the military assets on the territory of the newly independent states, they sort of stayed put initially.
So Ukraine just inherited what was physically there.
That's right, and it was a staggering amount. Roughly 4,000 nuclear warheads in total.
4,000, wow. Okay, break that down. What kind of weapons are we talking about?
So you had the strategic stuff, the big long-range weapons, around 1,840 warheads there.
Okay.
That included about 130 ICBMs, the UR-100N type, each carrying 6 warheads.
Mm-hmm.
And then 46 of those massive RT-23s, the train-based ones.
The rail-mobile ICBMs, yeah.
Right. 10 warheads each on those. Plus, strategic bombers, 25 Tu-95s and 2-160s carrying air-launched cruise missiles. It was a serious strategic force.
An absolutely immense capability. And that wasn't even all of it. You mentioned tactical nukes, too.
Yeah, on top of the strategic ones, estimates put the tactical warhead count somewhere between, say, 2,000 and 2,500.
Tactical meaning battlefield use.
Exactly. Nuclear artillery shells, bombs for tactical aircraft, short-range missiles, a whole different category.
But here's the catch, right? Dr. Neymotin highlights this. Ukraine had the hardware, but not the keys.
That's the crucial point. Physical possession, yes. Operational control, no. The launch codes, the authorization systems, they all remain firmly in Moscow.
So like having a locked vault full of treasure you can't actually open.
Pretty much. And it wasn't just the codes. The whole support infrastructure, the specialized maintenance facilities, the command systems was fragmented, mostly outside Ukraine.
And these aren't like rifles you just store in a warehouse.
Not at all. As Dr. Neymotin really stresses, nuclear warheads are incredibly complex, high-maintenance devices. They need constant expert attention. Ukraine just didn't have the independent capacity, the scientists, the labs, the industry to keep them going long-term.
Which leads us right into Dr. Neymotin's main argument, the crushing economic costs.
Yes. His estimates are pretty detailed. Just the direct annual maintenance in today's money would be around $78 million for the strategic warheads.
$78 million.
And maybe another $17 million or so for the tactical ones.
So you're looking at nearly $100 million a year just for basic upkeep.
Ballpark, yeah. 95 to 100 million every single year just to keep them sitting there, theoretically functional.
That sounds like a huge drain, especially for a new country dealing with all the post-Soviet economic chaos.
And Dr. Neymotin says that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's direct maintenance.
Right, there's more.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Running an independent nuclear force requires this massive, complex support system. Think about tritium, for example.
That's needed for the modern warheads, right? The boosting.
Exactly. It's crucial for many designs, especially the thermonuclear ones. But tritium has a pretty short half-life, decays relatively quickly.
About 12 years, I think.
12.3 years, yeah. So you need a continuous production capability just to replace the tritium that decays. It's like needing a constant supply of a very rare, very expensive fuel for your engine.
So it's not just storing them. You need active production lines for key components.
You do. plus specialized labs for taking warheads apart, refurbishing them, putting them back together safely. You need incredibly secure storage and handling facilities, advanced technology there.
And then command and control.
Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
A sophisticated, likely satellite-based command and control system to ensure you could even theoretically use them reliably and securely.
And people. You need lots of highly skilled people.
Thousands. Nuclear physicists, specialized engineers, material scientists, security forces, command staff. The list goes on. Highly trained, highly specialized personnel.
So when you add all that overhead, the infrastructure, what kind of total cost does Dr. Namoten estimate?
He figures that adds another, say, $200 to $400 million per year on top of the direct maintenance.
Wow.
So the total annual bill for Ukraine to maintain a credible, independent nuclear arsenal, somewhere between $300 and $500 million.
$1 a year, potentially.
In that range, yes.
Yeah.
For an economy like Ukraine's in the early 90s, trying to transition, facing huge challenges, that kind of money was simply, well, unthinkable. Economically devastating.
And many of these weapons were thermonuclear, which, as Dr. Namoten points out, adds another layer of cost and complexity.
That's right. Thermonuclear or hydrogen bombs use that fusion stage, often boosted by tritium. We talked about the tritium decay.
Right, the short half-life.
That makes these weapons inherently unstable over time if you don't maintain them meticulously. If you neglect them, their explosive power degrades.
So they might not work as designed.
Or worse, you increase the risk of misfires, accidents, significant safety hazards just having them around if they're not properly looked after.
So the maintenance isn't just to keep them working, it's fundamental to keeping them safe.
Absolutely essential. Continuous, very expensive upkeep is non-negotiable, just to ensure they're usable and relatively stable. This inherent fragility, this constant demand for resources, it really backs up Namoten's whole argument about the liability aspect.
Okay, so given all the lack of control, the missing infrastructure, the absolutely enormous costs, Ukraine's decision to give them up makes a lot more sense.
Exactly. Between 1992 and 1996, under the Lisbon Protocol, then the Budapest Memorandum, they agreed to transfer the warheads back to Russia for dismantling.
And they got security assurances in return from the U.S., U.K., and Russia itself.
They did. Now, obviously, looking back, those assurances didn't hold up, tragically.
Clearly not.
But, as Dr. Namoten's analysis suggests, the initial decision to disarm wasn't really based on faith in those assurances alone. It was driven by the hard realities on the ground. The economics, the technical impossibilities, the political situation. They couldn't afford to keep that arsenal safely or effectively.
So it was a pragmatic calculation based on their situation at the time.
Very much so, aligning perfectly with Namoten's view of nuclear weapons as burdens for nations not equipped to handle them.
And he argues this isn't just Ukraine's story, right? These lessons apply elsewhere.
Definitely. Think about countries pursuing nuclear weapons now, or those with smaller arsenals, like North Korea, maybe Iran, if they went that route.
They face similar economic strains.
Immense strains. Developing the weapons in the first place cost billions, diverting money from, healthcare, education, basic infrastructure.
And then the forever cost of maintenance kicks in.
Exactly. It's a perpetual drain on the budget. Look at North Korea, a textbook example, arguably, of a regime pouring resources into its nuclear program while its population suffers. It starkly illustrates Namoten's point about the economic burden.
Plus all the technical headaches, tritium, safety, security.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there's the geopolitical cost. Pursuing nukes often brings isolation, sanctions, trade restrictions.
Which just makes the economic problems even worse.
It becomes a vicious cycle. Namoten also touches on the strategic logic, or maybe the lack thereof, for smaller powers.
What's his take on that?
His view, essentially, is that it's almost unthinkable that a smaller nuclear state would launch a first strike against a major Western nuclear power.
Because of the response.
Because the certainty of a massive, overwhelming retaliatory strike from the West with its much larger, more sophisticated arsenal is just too high. It guarantees mutual destruction, MAD.
So the deterrent value against a superpower is kind of negated by the certainty of annihilation if you actually use them first.
That's the core idea behind MAD. And Namoten suggests its effectiveness relies on the West maintaining a united front, clear resolve, decisive leadership. Any doubt there could be destabilizing.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together, focusing on Dr. Lev Namoten's perspective. What's the main takeaway message here?
I think his central thesis is pretty clear. For most nations, particularly smaller ones or those without vast established infrastructure, the idea that nuclear weapons bring power or security is largely an illusion.
Because the costs outweigh the benefits.
Massively. The economic burden, the technical challenges, the political liabilities, they all add up to make these weapons more of a crippling weight than a strategic asset.
And Ukraine's story is the prime example.
In his view, yes. It's not about Ukraine losing some great strategic advantage it could have kept. It's about demonstrating that maintaining an affordable and autonomous and secure nuclear arsenal was simply impossible for them under circumstances.
So the inherited weapons weren't a prize, they were an anchor.
An unsustainable burden, exactly. His conclusion is that for most countries, pursuing or possessing nuclear weapons diverts vital resources, distorts national priorities, and can actually damage their international standing and stability rather than enhance it.
So to boil down Dr. Namotun's core argument, Ukraine giving up those thousands of warheads wasn't political naivety, but economic realism, a pragmatic necessity.
That's a very good summary of his position.
Which brings us to a really tough hypothetical. And again, we have to stress, Ukraine never had the launch codes. Russia kept control. It's purely speculative.
Understood.
But given Ukraine had physical possession of all those weapons originally placed there by Russia during the Soviet era, do you think the full-scale Russian invasion in 2022 might have played out differently, hypothetically, if those warheads had still been physically located in Ukraine, even without launch capability?
That's a deeply uncomfortable question to speculate on. I mean, the lack of operational control is fundamental. You can't ignore that. But the presence, thousands of nuclear warheads physically on Ukrainian soil, even inert, even under lock and key they couldn't open. It's possible, purely hypothetically, that the sheer unpredictable risk, the potential for escalation or disaster, might have factored into Russia's strategic calculus differently.
It might have raised the perceived stakes, the potential costs of invasion.
It might have. Perhaps deterred the specific kind of large-scale action we saw. But again, we are deep in speculation territory because the control issue is paramount. You can't really know.
A sobering thought experiment, nonetheless. And it leads to maybe one final thought for our listeners, extending from Dr. Namotun's analysis.
Okay.
We've talked about the crippling costs for smaller nations, but what about the really wealthy nations? What are the less obvious, maybe societal or long-term economic costs of perpetually maintaining these huge nuclear arsenals, even when you can technically afford the direct price tag? It's surely more than just the budget line item.
That's a great question to ponder. The opportunity costs, the scientific talent diverted, the constant low-level anxiety. Yeah, definitely something to think about.